Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Scotland at 7 with me, Gordon Ross. It's the 12th of November. Joining me this evening, my guests are Jamie Zimkowiak, who is a disability rights activist and also a member of the SNP's NEC. Welcome to the programme, Jamie.
Hi, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And also joining us this evening, a regular rural commentator, Day Tucker. Hi, Day.
Hi there, Gordon.
All right, good to have you back. So I'm going to go straight to the coronavirus update first before our main stories. As of 2 o'clock today, a total of 1,064,990 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Regional Scotland labs and the UK Government regional testing centres. Of these, 987,330 were confirmed negative, 77,660 were positive. There are now 1,212 new confirmed cases of COVID-19. There are 45 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive today. This will be an underestimate of the number of cases. Not everyone with the virus will display symptoms, and not all those with symptoms will be tested. Of the people who have tested positive, 1,207 were in hospital last night, 98 of whom were in intensive care. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus COVID-19 infections now stands at 3,188. This number only includes those who have died in hospital, having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures are unavailable for the moment, so we'll not be able to bring them to you this evening. However, if you'd like to join the conversation here tonight, you can do so on Twitter by following us at Broadcast Scot using the hashtag Scotland at 7. And now to tonight's main stories. Two new polls are showing a majority for Scottish independence. The two polls, the 13th and the 14th in a row with a majority for independence, show that the SNP hold a commanding lead over opposition parties, and Scottish voters are continuing to put their trust in the party. A YouGov poll shows the SNP on course to win 56% of the constituency vote in next year's election, with the Tories on 19% and Labour on 15%. A panel-based poll with almost identical fieldwork dates puts support for independence at 56%, the highest ever level of support for independence in a poll conducted by Panelbase. It puts the SNP on a 53% for the constituency vote and 46% on the regional list vote for the Scottish Parliament elections. The SNP's deputy leader, Keith Brown, said, "These are yet more significant polls for the SNP, which show voters across Scotland continue to place their trust in the party to deliver. Scotland must have the right to choose a better path than the shambolic hard Brexit Tory government at Westminster. That decision is for the people of Scotland, not a Tory government that we didn't vote for." Now, let me come to you, first of all, Jamie, this evening. This is the 13th and 14th polls showing an SNP lead. What do you put this down to? Is it just Brexit, do you think, or is there more to it than that?
I think it's a combination of factors. I think, firstly, people are realising, unfortunately, through the midst of a pandemic, what Scotland could look like if we had control over our own affairs. I think the leadership comparison also plays a big part of it. You've got the direct comparison of a Tory, such as Boris Johnson, versus somebody who's more progressive in Nicola Sturgeon. And the leadership style is based on the data that we have before us, something that is helping people or encouraging them to come to a decision that Scotland's future is probably best served in Scotland's hands.
Okay, Jamie, thank you for that. Dave, what's your reaction to this? Have you been following the polls recently? And what do you put the SNP's success down to, do you think?
Yeah, well, in answer to your first question, I don't really follow the polls that much. But I put down their success to exactly what Jamie said, but there are other factors as well, in that Scots do not like being spoken to the way that we are spoken to by the Westminster politicians down there. We don't like being told what to do, or when we can do it, or how we can do it. So that I think weighs quite heavily on the reasons why the polls have increased, because along with the increase of polls, with the increase of the sharp Tory voices telling us what we can and can't do.
I noticed that Joe Biden echoed the sentiment, Day, that you just expressed, which was that the people of Scotland don't like to be told what to do. Do you think Mr. Biden will have something to say about an independence referendum later as well?
Oh, I've no doubt he'll bide his time. But I've no doubt, I mean, all world leaders will feel that they could have a say in it, whether it's a supportive say or a negative say. It'll all depend on the political situation. But I suspect it'll be more supportive than anything else because the UK no longer holds the position of power that it used to hold. And certainly under Boris Johnson, that is not going to return anytime soon.
Okay, Dave, thank you for that. Let's move on to our next story now. And a Scottish budget date has now been agreed. The Scottish Government's budget will be published on the 28th of January 2020, Finance Secretary Kate Forbes has announced. It follows the UK Government's decision to postpone its autumn budget until an unspecified date in the new year. Ms Forbes said, coming amidst the unprecedented global pandemic, the forthcoming Scottish budget will be one of the most important since devolution. It's my task to prioritise our resources as effectively as possible to drive the country's economic recovery from coronavirus, COVID-19, whilst also managing the ongoing impact of the virus. The Chancellor's decision to delay the UK autumn budget until next year causes significant difficulties for the Scottish budget process. Although we expect to receive some funding information from the UK Spending Review on the 25th of November, the absence of a UK autumn budget means that we will have to make decisions based on partial or provisional information, with no indication of potential changes to UK tax policies. In these circumstances, and to allow us to take account of the emerging position on any EU exit deal, and also the evolving situation with COVID-19, I believe it's necessary to publish the Scottish Budget 21-22 in early 2021, rather than later this year. Jamie, I'm sure you're probably aware of this already, having already been involved in the party and its policies. How important is it, do you think, for Scotland to set a budget despite these difficulties and despite the lack of any information from the Chancellor?
Well, I think we just have to appreciate the circumstances that we're in Scotland with the limited powers that we do have. And obviously we have a finance secretary or a cabinet secretary of finance who's responsible and wants to do the best for businesses across Scotland. With one hand tied behind her back, has got to make some decision based on partial information. Now, this is not normal. What country sets their budgets with only having partial information? And as Kate said, in the midst of a global pandemic, coupled by the fact that we're going to have that Brexit cliff edge at the end of the year. One of the other topics that we're going to be coming to later is just the total chaos that is in the heart of Boris Johnson's government with chopping and changing personnel. So Kate is quite right to put a date in the sand to say to businesses and Scotland, this is what we are going to do. We're going to give you as much information as we can. However, and we don't have all of the answers right now, so you have to bear with us. What else could the people of Scotland expect in this circumstance?
So basically, Jamie, what you're saying is that that the Scottish Finance Secretary is really sort of drawing a line in the sand here. She's saying that the Scottish economy needs this certainty, and as far as she's able to provide that, that's what she's going to do, and she's named a date for that.
Of course, as an advocate of Scottish independence, I would want our government and our parliament to have full control over such decisions and all the economic levers, but we don't. So we are in this situation, which is pretty ridiculous, where our finance secretary has got to go to the country with partial information. As I said earlier, just not normal.
All right, Jamie, thank you very much. Dave, coming to you now, moving on from what Jamie was saying, that our Finance Secretary, Kate Forbes, is having to make decisions about how the Scottish budget is to be disposed of or dispersed next year, with vital chunks of information missing. Do you think that this is, or do you think that the British government is going to react badly to this, that the Scots are being uppity and trying to force their hand?
Absolutely, they will. I mean, every time our First Minister manages to get something in ahead of Boris Johnson, she gets criticised for it, or for jumping the gun, or for trying to show up Boris Johnson. Well, I'm sorry, but you can't help showing up Boris Johnson because he's so inept. But yes, we will get criticised, and Kate will get criticised. But what else can she do? She's trying to do the best for Scotland with, as Jamie says, her hands tied behind her back. If it all goes belly up, no doubt they'll give us brickbats for that. But at least we've tried. We've tried to mitigate the difficulties that the whole country is being presented with, not just Scotland.
From your own point of view, Day, as a rural commentator, how is the rural community reacting to this? I would imagine that farmers, fishermen, and other, shall we say, rural businesses must be desperate for some kind of information at the moment, especially about things like subsidies for farming. Do you think that the Scottish Secretary for the Treasury is able to provide any kind of surety on that?
Well, the difficulty is that with this bill going through Parliament at the moment that we're fighting against, in the past we did have control of how our section of that agricultural budget was dispersed. But until we can ensure that the bill that's going through doesn't take all those powers away from us, we're going to be stuck with the decisions made by DEFRA and the government down in Westminster. Now, as it happens, I attended a webinar today, which is run by the Agriculture and Horticultural Development Board, which is the English version of our own Quality Meat Scotland. And they're funded through the levies that are given to them from the sale of live animals at the market, into the food chain.
Yeah.
Now, millions of pounds of our levies have in the past gone down to the ADHP because our stock has had to go south to be slaughtered and processed. So Scottish lamb has at times been called British beef and British lamb, well, usually called British beef and British lamb. And we only get a small amount. So there's a huge fight going on about getting that money back up here. But that's just a tiny section of what's going on. And I listened to what they were proposing. So there's in England, as in Scotland, I think it's going to be guaranteed. The subsidy is going to be guaranteed until 2024. In England, it's going to stop in 2024. It's going to be reducing every year up until then as a direct payment to farmers. But they will be able to go into other schemes like the ELM scheme, which is an environmental scheme. And up in Scotland, we're taking a slightly different approach to that. We're not doing a wholesale change. It's going to be a much more gradual change. There are less difficulties about the environment up here for obvious reasons. It's a different kind of countryside that we have, and different kinds of weather and what have you. So we shouldn't expect to be the same as down south, which is why we're trying to fight this agricultural. Well, it's not. What's it called again? The bill that's going through just now.
Or the Internal Markets Bill.
That's the one. Yes, the Internal Markets Bill.
Okay, well, thank you, Dave, for an interesting comment there. And moving on to our next story now. Downing Street has seen infighting. There has been unhappiness about Downing Street operations for some time. A leading Tory backbencher has said following the resignation of one of Boris Johnson's most senior aides. Lee Kane announced that he would step down as Director of Communications on Wednesday after ministers, advisers and the Prime Minister's fiancée, Carrie Simons, are said to have protested over his planned promotion to Chief of Staff. Kane's departure has thrown into doubt the future of close ally and Johnson's most senior adviser, Dominic Cummings, who is also reported to be considering resigning. Cummings is said to be furious that Kane has been forced out. commenting on Downing Street on the Tory civil war, I beg your pardon, the SNP Westminster Deputy Leader, Kirsten Oswald MP, said the UK faces a growing Tory unemployment crisis, a devastating global pandemic, as well as the looming end of the Brexit transition period. And it's shameful, and a shameful distraction that senior members of the Tory government are wasting time fighting among themselves when people's lives and livelihoods are under threat. In contrast, Nicola Sturgeon's SNP Scottish Government are getting on with the job at hand and tackling coronavirus with the seriousness it deserves. It's no wonder that a growing majority of people in Scotland want nothing more to do with the broken Westminster system. Okay, let me come to you first, Jamie. So Boris Johnson seems to be suffering from what I used to call the old Beatles problem, when his girlfriend starts to break up the band. Isn't it interesting that his fiancée seems to have a say in how he's advised? Is this normal, do you think?
Interesting perhaps isn't the word that I would use to describe it. I think the fact that, they should be focusing on other priorities. Yesterday, we noted that 50,000 people tragically died because of coronavirus. And what we had instead is Westminster political correspondents tweeting and reporting on the inner shenanigans of what's happening in Number 10. So you've got these fraught relationships between Dominic Cummings, Lee Kane, Allegra Stratton, the former ITV broadcasters, even had a say in this and has caused some pain and confusion. And, as you pointed out, Carrie Symonds also. But I think what's at the heart of it is actually failed leadership. We have Boris Johnson as a Prime Minister who doesn't know what's happening from one day to the next. And unfortunately, what's happening is the media is lapping it up. It's entertainment to them. It's an episode of EastEnders in real life, whereby we should actually have a government that's focused on sealing a deal with the EU, on trying to cope and come up with ideas to help and support businesses and those that are suffering in terms of their loss of income and debt increases and job insecurity. But instead, they've turned inwards and they're focusing on themselves. It's just unfortunate to watch, and sometimes actually it feels like it's another country, because up here we've got a government that's actually focused on the day job and getting on with it. And so it's just bizarre to watch this circus unfold in London week after week, time after time.
Okay, Jerry, thank you for that. Dave, coming to you now, I'm not sure how you feel about this, but it seems that the Conservative government is trying to spend a lot of time rearranging its PR department here. And I noticed in a slightly ironic turn today that Ian Blackford said that the SNP is advertising for a communications director for Westminster as well at the moment. Do you think there's too much emphasis on these special advisors? Should government ministers be taking more advice perhaps from industry or from the civil service?
Yes, I completely agree. There's not an awful lot I can add to Jamie's wonderful summation of the whole situation. If we cast our minds back to various other administrations, I can remember when Tony Blair's government was in, he had special advisors there. We know who that was. And Margaret Thatcher and Wilson, and in fact, was it Wilson or the other Labour leader? There was not some scandal about going to be shot or got rid of somehow. So these kind of things have gone on, but they've never had the light shone on them the way that the media is shining on the present government. Just to go back to your earlier introduction when you said that the Tories were suffering unemployment or something, and I thought, oh, great, because I was thinking that unemployment was happening with the Tories in the government. Sadly, I think you probably meant that unemployment in the country is suffering,
yes,
not that the Tories
under their watch. Yeah,
would that they were suffering unemployment.
Well, you never know how long these special advisors will last. Anyway, let's move on now. And there is uncertainty over the UK's emissions trading scheme. The SNP has criticised the UK government for refusing to rule out a blatant power grab on Scotland's ability to tackle the climate emergency. All governments of the UK have been preparing to enter the UK emissions trading scheme, the ETS, which was due to come into force at the end of the Brexit transition period. ETS is intended to incentivise decarbonisation and could account for over a quarter of Scotland's carbon emissions. ETS is replacing a similar initiative in place in the European Union. However, with 2 months to go, the UK government is still refusing to rule out implementing the carbon emission tax, instead of potentially stripping the devolved governments of control. The SNP MSP Gillian Martin, the convener of the Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform Committee, said Scotland is leading the way in the UK on tackling the climate emergency. And with COP26 just around the corner, the UK needs to show the world how it is playing its part. By refusing to rule out implementing the CET, the Tories would strip Scotland of our powers in achieving our net zero target. Now, I'm going to come back to you first, Jamie, as I know that you maybe have more knowledge of this than some of us, but the carbon trading scheme, these emissions trading schemes, what are they exactly designed to do? Is this some way of people being able to buy and sell other people's carbon emissions? Have I got that right?
Well, I don't know the details exactly, but I think to agree with the point that Gillian made, you know, I have to laugh at the fact that in his congratulatory message to Biden, Boris Johnson said that they want to work in partnership, amongst other things, when it comes to climate change. And here we have a Tory government that is not interested in climate change. Gillian represents a constituency in the northeast. Just further up the road, a couple of miles, is Peterhead. And the residents and any of your viewers in Peterhead will know time and time again how promises regarding carbon capture have failed. And so the Tories need to actually just remove the carbon tax or remove that off the table. As you pointed out, we have COP26 on our doorstep. We actually are going to be on the world stage, and it's very important that we as a country are seen to be doing all we can to reduce our emissions.
Well, we do like to pride ourselves, Jamie, on being a world leader in terms of things like renewable energy. And the COP26 was held over, wasn't it, because of COVID? And it's going to be held in Glasgow, I understand. Can I ask you just how much of a role do you think Nicola Sturgeon will be able to play in that? Because we've all heard that Boris Johnson was planning to make sure that she didn't get a look in common parlance.
I think that would be a strategic mistake if they didn't include the First Minister of Scotland in that, in terms of how it would look on a domestic platform. So I think that they should perhaps think again about not including the First Minister of Scotland when it is actually going to be taking place in Scotland's second city.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. Day, I know that you have a strong set of opinions when it comes to environment. The carbon trading scheme is a complicated beast, isn't it? Because it allows companies to buy and sell each other's carbon emissions so that one company can plant trees while another company burns fossil fuels. Is the carbon trading scheme, in your opinion, the way forward, or do you think there's a better way of doing this?
From what little I know of it, and it's been on the go for over a decade now, I can remember being involved in talks with landowners who were being given a presentation on the opportunities for landowners to get involved in this carbon trading scheme. And it was being sold as a money-making venture. So you can imagine anybody whose landownings are mainly forestry, they will be able to claim all sorts of carbon tickets and audits and what have you that will have a value that could be sold to a company that is pumping out emissions like Billio. There's something not right about that. There's something immoral about that. You know, these guys are going to make, they were getting subsidies anyway for planting the trees, and now they're going to make more money in order to pretend that certain industries are less harmful because they've bought the carbon audits from somebody
Yeah.
else.
It
It
all,
just doesn't.
yeah, I was going
It
to say they
doesn't.
always sounded to me like the fossil fuel companies or the big polluters were actually just shifting the problem or sweeping it under the carpet. It was somebody else's job now to clear up their mess for them. It
Yeah.
never struck me as being a great idea.
Mm.
Is there another solution to this, do you think? Is there a way in which companies could be more directly involved, do you think, in reducing carbon emissions or offsetting them themselves instead?
Yes, well, I'm a great believer in the carrot rather than the stick. But equally, SEPA, who's not a favourite agency of farmers, I have to admit, but SEPA possibly do not have the powers that they need to really get stuck into some of these polluters. And if the polluter pays is supposed to be
Yeah.
the mandate that we have against them. But then, if you look what happened with the last foot and mouth outbreak, which was caused by a leak down at Pirbright, I think, because of a leaky pipe, and the polluter wasn't made to pay for that at all,
Uh-huh.
and yet it cost the whole country a lot of money, not just the farmers. So
Well,
unless the governments are prepared to actually act and get stuck into the polluters and make it not worth their while to pollute, I can't see us moving on.
you think there's not really any consequences to their actions? There's nothing to
Yeah,
motivate
not
them.
definitely not enough.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, moving on. And Neil Gray, MP, has called for an end to the 5-week wait for benefits as debt and food bank use increase. The UK government must scrap the 5-week wait and strengthen welfare protections, says the SNP, after it was reported that over 1 million people are in severe debt due to coronavirus, on the same day that new figures showed that a record 1.2 million emergency food parcels were handed out in just 6 months. Research from Step Change Debt Charity has revealed today that an estimated 1.2 million people affected by the coronavirus pandemic are in severe problem debt. The charity also believes that 2.87 million people across the UK who have been impacted by coronavirus are now at high risk of long-term debt problems. The Trussell Trust also reported today that it has seen a 47% increase in need during the crisis, and that its food banks had handed out 1.2 million emergency food parcels in the last 6 months to September, with more than 470,000 supplies going to children. The SNP's Work and Pension spokesperson Neil Gray MP has called again on the UK government to scrap the debt-inducing 5-week wait within universal credit and make advance payments non-refundable grants instead of loans, as well as make the £20 uplift permanent and extend it to legacy benefits. These are steps that have been proposed by the Work and Pensions Committee. So, Jamie, over to you for this one. The SNP making a demand which I know that many hundreds of thousands of people have been demanding for some time, that this mandatory 5-week wait to get any money from universal credit must end. It seems to be driving poverty even faster than it's meant to be a catch-all credit for everyone who's fallen on hard times, but instead it's having the opposite effect.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out that it's actually not just Neil Gray and the SNP that are calling for this. It is actually a wider committee that is doing so, which just shows how out of step the Conservatives are. We only saw a few days ago their U-turn on free school meals for children after the great campaign by the footballer Marcus Rashford. So, hopefully with the pressure mounting and unfortunately on the backs of people who have been made redundant again because of the UK government's dithering, and we might actually see some progress and some movement here. But the numbers that you mentioned there, they're actually quite staggering. It's 3 million people that are going to be in long-term debt as a result of coronavirus. We've got 1.2 million people receiving food parcels within a 6-month period. And now we're going into the depths of winter when heating bills are going to rise. Cost of living goes up as people are going to be staying at home more often. So with these things all combined, and then you've got the 5-week wait for universal credit application, Neil Gray's proposals make absolute sense. Let's give people a grant, not a loan. Let's help support them live. Otherwise, the long-term impact and the costs that it's going to take to come out of this are going to be much higher. So the decisions have got to be made by the government now. So instead of their infighting over who's going to be their next press secretary, they need to make some decisions that are going to fix and solve people's problems now.
Very good, James. That is an excellent answer. Dave, I'm sure you probably echoed Jamie's comments there. Is the problem with universal credit, as you see it in the rural community, is it as bad as it is perhaps in the cities and the central belt?
All I can say is I'm sure it is. I actually haven't heard many people in my community complaining about it, but then the people in my community don't complain. They just get on with it. And they're supported because it's a small rural community. There's lots of, it's more of a hidden poverty in rural areas that happens. Yes.
So Dave, do people in rural communities tend to support one another when they fall in hard times rather than allowing people to have to go sort of cap in hand for universal credit?
I would say on the whole, definitely. And you get a lot of families, extended families. I mean, I know in the farming community, there are various family names that proliferate right throughout my area. And they're all linked to each other, their cousins or aunties or what have you. And they do look out for each other.
So, okay, Dave, listen, thank you very much for that. I'm going to move on now. I'm trying to catch up a little bit of time this evening. And we're looking at a case of a Royal Mail driver who has won a £14,000 payout over disability harassment. A disabled man has won a £14,000 compensation payout from the Royal Mail for disability harassment in what he described as a toxic work culture. The case is the latest of a series of discrimination cases Royal Mail has lost. At a hearing at London's Central Employment Tribunal earlier this month, Nabil Medinejad, a delivery driver based at the Royal Mail's Mount Pleasant sorting office in central London, who has ADHD, dyslexia and dyspraxia, won his case for disability harassment. The senior manager described him as a good worker, very good. He alleged that a manager, Mohammed Hafiz, approached him and then insulted and intimidated him by making repeated references to him being dodgy. As a result, and due to other concerns previously raised, Medinejad went on protracted sick leave. Although two witnesses supported Medinejad's account, Hafiz denied making the comments. An independent caseworker held up Medinejad's complaint and said that the comments were wholly inappropriate in any situation. Despite the findings of the independent caseworker, Royal Mail opposed the claim for disability harassment and said it was not aware of Medinejad's disability. The tribunal upheld the claim for disability harassment and found that Royal Mail had been aware of Medinejad's disability, which was discussed directly with some line managers and adjustments made since his application to join them and throughout his employment. It found that Hafiz was relying on rumours for his accusations of Medinejad being dodgy, and that he had a negative perception of Medinejad due to his disability. Now, Jamie, I know as a disability rights activist you will have plenty to say on this. Is this kind of complaint a common thing, do you think, in the workplace?
Well, it actually comes in the week that we're celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Disability Discrimination Act. So I think it's a point to remember, and I'm actually glad that you guys raised this story. My disability is not hidden, so my disability is pretty obvious when I'm walking down the street. But the case here with Nabil is one that a lot of your viewers will recognise if they have a hidden impairment or condition such as ADHD, dyspraxia, or dyslexia. And I think the thing that strikes me is the Royal Mail didn't put their hands up and say, okay, we were at fault by. Obviously, they did provide reasonable adjustments, but what they did not provide in this instance was enough support and training for their managers to know the conditions. And I, as somebody that has offered disability awareness trainings across Scotland and across Europe, I go into organisations with the mindset that not everybody's going to know everything about disability, and that's fair. But what the Royal Mail should have done in this instance is support their staff to have a fuller understanding of what disabilities are and what various conditions mean. And that's why they actually, well, the decision was upheld and Nabil was awarded £14,000. But it is just really disappointing to see that the Royal Mail themselves didn't hold their hands up and say, yes, we could have done more. And that's something that employers should recognise with this judgment, is that they should provide a space where their employees will be able to be equal and work productively and feel safe and not have to take them to such tribunals.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Dave, one of the things that stood out from me from this story was the fact that the Royal Mail denied that they even knew about this man's ADHD, his dyspraxia and dyslexia, when in actual fact they had known it all along. Surely it's remarkable in this day and age that a company could lie like that at a tribunal.
Oh, Gordon, come on. Really?
Certainly when they were going to lose it, Dave. Yeah.
No, that lying is now regarded as normal, and it's being allowed and badly led from the government at the very top down in Westminster. So this is where it's all coming from, and the time is coming, hopefully very soon, when all this, perhaps with the election of Joe Biden, when lying will be called out.
Let's hope so, Dave. Let's hope so. Okay, moving on to Mr. Biden, interestingly enough. Mr. Biden has moved forward as top Democrats have blasted the Republican post-election shenanigans. The US President-elect Joe Biden moved ahead with his planning his new administration on Thursday as his fellow Republicans in Congress blasted Republican shenanigans, challenging Donald Trump's election loss and urged action on the coronavirus pandemic. Two top Democrats in Congress, House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer on Thursday urged Republicans to join them in passing legislation to address the pandemic and to buttress the battered economy. Attention is now expected to shift to Biden's picks for cabinet post, although aides have so far given few clues about when announcements will be made. On foreign policy, diplomat and long-term confidant Antony Blinken is seen as a possible choice for Secretary of State or National Security Advisor. Whoever is chosen for Treasury Secretary will have to cope with a recession and joblessness, as well as serving as the fulcrum to address wealth inequality, climate change and other issues. Foreign allies have congratulated Biden. A group of prominent former world leaders, known as the Elders, chaired by the former Irish President Mary Robinson, urged Trump to accept defeat, fearing that he was putting at risk the functioning of American democracy. So, Jamie, Mr. Biden's trying to get all his ducks in a row. Do you have any opinions on who he might choose as some of his top aides? Anything that you think might happen?
Well, I've been keeping my eye on what's been going on across the water, and I think it's a bit too early to say. I think anybody that's putting their name in the hat or pointing to anything with any certainty is perhaps misleading their viewers or their readers or the people that are following them. But I think what I found actually quite interesting today is Trump's behaviour as Alaska was confirmed to go his way, and they're still counting hundreds of thousands of votes in some of the states. He's actually turned on Fox News. So I just have this image of Trump sitting in his bedroom and flicking through, trying to find a channel that's actually sympathetic with his views, whereby pretty much everybody and their granny has congratulated Biden. So it's too early to say in direct answer to your question.
Okay. Dave, what's your opinion on this? Joe Biden choosing his new team. I heard a probably rather optimistic rumour that he might choose Barack Obama as his British ambassador. I think that perhaps is just a little bit of wishful thinking. Have you any guesses on who he might appoint?
No, I'm afraid I don't really follow American politics very much. I try and avoid it. And in fact, I got very depressed for months and months and months until Joe Biden appeared to be getting the ticket for winning, when my depression, strangely enough, lifted. And I feel an awful lot better knowing that probably he will be the correct appointee. But it won't happen, and there'll be all sorts of trouble from Trump up until then. So it won't happen until, is it the 12th of December or January that the Senate votes on it?
Okay, well, thank you, Dave. Now, moving abroad again, and at least 74 migrants have died in a shipwreck off the Libyan coast. At least 74 migrants died in a shipwreck off the coast of Libya on Thursday, the United Nations Migration Agency said, with 47 survivors brought to shore by coastguards and fishermen. Libya, which has had no stable central government since NATO-backed uprising in 2011, is a major transit point for mainly African migrants seeking to cross the Mediterranean to reach Europe. At least 900 have already drowned this year attempting the crossing, according to the agency, the International Organization for Migration. Another 11,000 have been stopped at sea and returned to Libya, where migrants are often detained, exploited, or abused. Jamie, I know this is a topic which gets much, sort of news coverage these days, but it's rather out of our line of sight over here in the UK. What is it that the governments can do, do you think, to try and end this stream of migration from North Africa? Is it more state aid required for the countries where they are coming from? In other words, to try and create better circumstances for them there? Or is there some other means, do you think, of helping these people?
I think the solutions, Gordon, would be discussed in a show much longer than what we have this evening, because it actually comes down to international cooperation, large corporations and governments basically stealing from other countries, and it causes deprivation and the selling of weapons of mass destruction to corrupt governments. And so, it's a wider discussion that needs to be had. But I think, the thing that we have to recognize here is this is the 8th such tragedy to happen since October in the Mediterranean. And these are people that are fleeing corrupt governments, that are fleeing war, and that are wanting to come to have a more prosperous life for them and their family. And in those boats that capsized, there were women and children.
Yes.
Among those people that died. And we dehumanize it by calling them migrants. And we just forget that it is actually people that are wanting a better life. And I think that as we come to the festive period and we are complaining about not being able to drive 20 miles to see our family in the next city, we have to think about those that are actually fleeing such circumstances as these people, and perhaps treat them with a bit more respect.
A good point, very good point, Jamie. Dave, how do you feel about this the migration problem? Jamie saying that really it should help us to gain a sense of perspective. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think Jamie has put it extremely well. This is self-inflicted. If we're regarding it as a problem, it's a self-inflicted problem. We're the ones who have blown up their cities and their countries and damaged their trade, and put in place all sorts of policies that allow and also that allow these corrupt politicians within their own countries like the recent one, where he's what was the one where the factory blew up because it had a whole lot of nitrogen stored?
That was in Lebanon, I think.
In the yes.
Yeah, Lebanese government was very corrupt, I believe.
Yes, and it's not the only one. An awful lot of them are incredibly corrupt. So until I don't know how it can be done, but certainly not with weapons bombing the blazes out of people.
So you think perhaps by stopping selling weapons to these despots, we could at least reduce the harm?
Well, yes, absolutely. On the other hand, you'll get other countries like Russia who'll probably replace our weapons, and the Americans, and they'll sell weapons to them as well. But that's no excuse. We should be morally standing on the high ground and saying, no, we are not going to do it. You know, we're all the Western nations are crying out to stop the nuclear arms build-up. Well, we should be stopping the arms build-up, never mind just the nuclear arms build-up.
Okay, that's a very good point, I think, well made. Okay, we're moving back home now, and colleges are to recommend further action to deal with the impact of coronavirus. A collaboration between colleges in East Central Scotland has published their proposals on how best to deliver skills and opportunities in Scotland to support the economic recovery. The East Central Scotland Colleges collaboration, consisting of Edinburgh College, Fife College, Forth Valley College and West Lothian College, worked to produce a comprehensive skills programme designed to help meet the future needs of the Scottish economy. Titled Our Futures Programme, the report recommends 8 distinct reskilling and upskilling products that could provide much needed support to individuals and employers who are set to be hit by the economic downturn caused by the coronavirus pandemic. They include suggestions such as the creation of skills boost academies in key areas such as digital and industry, and the development of accelerator programmes which would see colleges across Scotland able to introduce accelerated versions of existing qualifications that are already on offer, such as engineering, computing and care. These innovative programmes will place the college sector at the forefront of the country's agenda for economic recovery. Jamie, this sounds on the face of it to be a very good idea. The colleges themselves appear to be basically bootstrapping this notion. Should there be, do you think, more government motivation in this? Do you feel that perhaps the colleges have largely been left to do this by themselves?
I don't necessarily agree with that. I think the Scottish Government released a paper just about 6 weeks ago that was written in part by the gentleman who ran Skyscanner for a period of time. So anything that directs people, as somebody that actually runs a small business in tech, anything that puts students, and whether they be mature students or graduates, just leaving school towards a career in engineering, in my book, is welcome. I think there is an opportunity here whereby we're doing things differently because of coronavirus. I'm in Argyll and Bute, and we have a brain drain whereby a lot of our young people decide to go to Glasgow or Edinburgh or even further afield for their education. So if our local colleges and campuses were to teach students remotely, there might be an opportunity for local economies to actually retain their young people in their communities instead of them having to go further afield. So this is actually something that I would prefer them to look at, in addition to diversifying into sectors where we actually need a workforce such as care, such as engineering.
Okay, Jamie, thanks for that. It's an interesting idea. Day, how do you feel about this? I know that you have a strong interest in the training of young people in rural economies as well. Does this sound like a good idea to you, the idea of these colleges getting together to accelerate their programs, to provide faster routes to qualifications?
I'm not sure about the faster routes to qualifications, but yes, this is not a new idea. It's a repeat. And it seems to happen in a regular cycle. But where it all goes wrong is when the colleges become cash-strapped and they need bums on seats. And therefore, if there aren't enough bums on the seats of what they deem to be the important sectors, then we have a problem.
Yeah.
There needs to be an overarching funding system that's going to support colleges, to put people through and try and support them through it financially.
One of the things, Day, that occurred to me with this, having worked in higher and further education myself many years ago, is the fact that we often used to find ourselves training people for jobs that didn't actually exist, and knowing that many of our students would have to go south of the border or overseas to find jobs. Do you think perhaps this is the wrong way round, that we should be trying to create the industries first and then the training?
No, I think it needs to be industry led.
Right.
The demand from industry should drive the types of courses that the colleges are putting on, and it may be that is the case.
Okay, well, maybe it is. It sounds like they're trying to do something useful anyway. Coming back to more useful things this evening, affordable housing for rural and island communities. A 5-year programme to fund affordable housing projects in rural and island communities is being extended, Housing Minister Kevin Stewart has told Parliament. Rural and Islands housing funds worth up to £30 million were launched in 2016 and will now run beyond March next year. The funds help groups such as community organisations, development trusts and private landowners to build new affordable housing or refurbish existing properties, and already supported projects that will deliver around 200 homes. Jamie, this sounds like a very good news story indeed, and perhaps the kind of thing that should be expanded more across the country.
Yes, it is definitely welcome news. Every time I hear the word affordable when it comes to housing, I'm reminded of a former colleague that would say affordable to whom. So there is that one caveat. And also, I think we need to look at how it is that we remove some of the red tape from local authorities, that we can get these buildings up fast. We also have some housing stock that is abandoned and derelict. How is it that we can turn that into homes that people want to live in? And that's a really quick route to solve some of the issues. Obviously, we've got properties now because of the pandemic that are actually empty because they were Airbnb properties. And I know that in urban locations such as our major cities, Edinburgh, Glasgow, and other areas across Scotland, these Airbnb properties are actually going on the market now for long-term rent. And so I think there is a lot of opportunity here, and I think that the Scottish Government's action on affordable homes, particularly in the island communities, is going to be welcome news indeed.
That's an interesting view of things, James. Day, taking this a stage further, is this, do you think, some kind of almost like a silver lining in the COVID cloud, that because of the fact that many of these holiday-let properties are now lying empty, that they will now become available for people to live in? Do you think that could be a long-term trend? I mean, Scottish tourism will eventually recover, but in the meantime, it does at least sound that there might be more existing properties coming on the market, and perhaps the addition of some more new builds would help to solve some of our homelessness issues.
Yes, well, wherever there's challenges, there's also opportunities. And yes, that is good. But you do wonder if once the vaccine comes through and things settle down, maybe 2-3 years hence, that the Airbnbs will flourish again, and there'll be a shortage of housing once again. So we really need to make the most of this time to try and fill the gap, the awful gap that there is between housing needs and what is available in terms of supply. But I'd like to see a much more innovative way of tackling it, perhaps through a competition, I don't know. But we've got some wonderful architects with amazing ideas of how to build affordable housing. You've only got to go to Glasgow School of Art Architecture Department to see what the students there are designing, where if you hark back to after the World War II, when people came back home and they had to put up houses very quickly, and they put up these awful little houses, which actually lasted for years and years and years.
The so-called prefabs.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, there were 2 of them at the end of one of my fields, and they were knocked down eventually. But you know, we are talking about an emergency.
Do you think, Dave, that there could possibly be a solution to be found by merging things like Scottish forestry with some kind of competition like that, perhaps to design houses made from Scottish timber that can be assembled really quickly? I mean, log cabins spring to mind in the Nordic style. They can be built in 10 days. Do you think something like that would be useful?
Something like that would be useful, but you have to remember that Sitka spruce, of which we have a vast amount, is not really sustainable. It's not suitable for that sort of thing. However, the larch is, whereby you can make it in layers, and it's very sustainable. But yes, absolutely. We need to be much more innovative about this sort of thing. Jamie was trying to...
Yeah, we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. There is an architect, Malcolm Fraser, who's actually done quite a lot of work with Commonweal on designing homes in an urban setting where everybody has a space of land, or a garden, is what we would normally call it. Don't necessarily, and all of the materials are locally sourced. So we've actually got architects and designs and examples that work now, and we could actually just get on with it.
It sounds like a good idea. Maybe something for the Scottish Government to think about in the future. Anyway, we're coming up towards the end of the programme, but sorry, Dave, did you have something more to add?
They need to relax some of the very rigid planning rules within the local authorities in order to do what Jamie is suggesting.
Okay, good point, Dave. I think you're right. Well made. Moving along, because we're running a little bit low on time, our final story this evening is actually on the subject of architecture, in a way. The Kingston Bridge has been awarded Category C listing status by Historic Environment Scotland. Glasgow's Kingston Bridge has been recognised with listing status at Category C by Historic Environment Scotland, HES, for its special architectural and historical interest. The decision to list the 10-lane road bridge, which spans the River Clyde, follows nomination for listing by Transport Scotland to mark the bridge's 50th anniversary in June, and a consultation where the public were asked for their views on the proposal. Through listing, the bridge has been recognised as a significant, albeit controversial, infrastructure project which transformed the city of Glasgow. Forming part of the M8, Scotland's first motorway, its construction reflected the social and economic changes taking place in Scotland's cities in the mid-20th century, as private car ownership rapidly rose. The bridge also has special architectural interest as an early example of a cantilevered concrete box girder bridge by one of the leading civil engineering firms of its period. Today, the Kingston Bridge is the most used road bridge in Scotland and amongst the busiest in Europe, being used daily by between 150,000 and 160,000 vehicles. And I can definitely confirm that, having driven over it many times. So, Jamie, is this a surprise to have something like this massive 10-lane bridge given a kind of protected status by Historic Environment Scotland?
Well, I think you set out there in your remarks why it is important in Scotland's history in terms of developing and transport, particularly of those that live in the West Coast, such as myself, that go into Glasgow fairly regularly. However, I have to say it's fairly disappointing. Scotland's got such natural beauty and so many more interesting landmarks. And if you look at an aerial shot of the bridge, the Kingston Bridge, the land around it, that's not being utilised, I think that's a shame. And we're not necessarily focusing on how we could use that land necessarily to the benefit of the local population. And also, we discussed earlier about our commitments to climate change. Are we really going to, on the back of COP26, say that one of our landmarks is a 10-lane road, whereby we could perhaps look at things a bit differently and encourage our population to use other forms of transport? So I would say it's not surprising, given how important it is. However, it is actually still a disappointing decision.
Okay, Dave, very briefly, if you would, as we're coming close to the end of the programme, what's your view of the Kingston Bridge? Should it be given a listed status or not?
Well, has it not already been given it?
It has, but I just wondered whether you thought it deserved it.
Well, I'm actually surprised because all we focus on is the Forth Road bridges.
Yes, true.
But I do agree with Jamie. I think there are many other things that we could be awarding something to. Let's have something a bit more innovative.
Yeah, maybe one of Scotland's largest wind turbines or something like that, Dave, perhaps.
No, 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 no.
Too much controversy at the end of the programme. Okay, well, listen, I'm afraid we have run out of time this evening. So, as usual at this time in the programme, it's my duty to ask you for your help. And if you enjoy broadcasting Scotland's programmes and you enjoy Scotland at 7, you can also help us by becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To do that, just follow the instructions at the bottom of the screen now, and that will lead you to our website. That is it from me tonight. It just remains for me to thank both Jamie and Tucker, my guests this evening, and hope that you'll watch again Scotland at 7. From all of us here, very good night to you.
Night, night.
Hooray! Very nice, smooth